Alright, welcome. My name is Aubrey Bassett, and today I'm just going to be doing a little mini lesson on calculating sales tax for 7th grade math. First off, we need to look at our goals and objectives, and straight out of the math standards, we have to calculate sales tax for a given purchase. On an individual basis, our expectation is I can convert a percent to a decimal in order to calculate total purchase price including tax. Now this is a really relevant skill because I'm sure many of us have gotten into a situation where we might get to a register at a store and not have enough money because we hadn't considered the taxes that we're going to have to pay along with the price of our items. So hopefully today we can come up with a little strategy to figure out what our sales tax actually is, and we can predict that and know ahead of time so when we get money out of our wallet we actually have enough at the register. So before we even move into calculating sales tax, we need to make sure we're up to date on all of our decimal operations. The reason for this is because when we're dealing with math with money, you've got to be dealing with decimals. So first we're looking at multiplication. And just remember, you don't have to line up the decimals. Right here we have 93 and 2/10. It could have been 20 hundredths and we dropped that 0 after the 2, so that works fine with multiplication because you don't have to line up the decimals. Now you do your regular multiplication, first ignoring the decimals. Next, you're going to actually count those decimals, those spaces, to the right of each factor's decimal. Then you're going to add them up. So there's only one number to the right of the decimal on my top factor, so I'm going to take that as 1. There's 2 decimals to the right. There's 2 spaces to the right of the decimal on my second factor. So I have 1 plus 2, that's 3, which means that my decimal is going to be 3 spaces to the left on my product. So I'm going to assign my decimal to the product between the 7 and the 4. Perfect. Now we're moving on to decimal addition. Now this is a little bit easier, and the most important rule to remember is that you do have to line up the decimals for addition. In that situation, you also line up each place value, do your regular addition down, and sometimes you have to add zeros as placeholders. So right here we added a 0 in the hundredths place on our first term. And next you just add down, and finally drop the decimal down. So our decimal is going to go right in line with the top 2 decimals. We have 93 and 28 hundredths. Now the last one we need to look into is conversions. We can't just deal with a percentage tax rate, we've got to convert that to a decimal. So here's a little chart as a reminder. And the rule to remember, if you haven't committed it to memory, is that you do need to multiply the decimal by 100 to get to that percent. Another way to look at that is just moving the decimal 2 to the right to get to a percent. Now the one we're going to be looking at mostly today is moving from a percent to a decimal, because most of the time you get tax rate in percent form. Right here you would divide the percent by 100 and actually drop the percentage symbol. Another way to look at that is just moving the decimal 2 spaces to the left and writing that as a decimal without a percent sign. What I looked at online was the tax rate in a couple different states, which is pretty interesting, but right here in Lubbock, our tax rate is 8.25%, which written as a decimal, you move it 2 to the left, is 0.0825. And that's going to be our relevant tax rate for today. So now that we've looked at all of our prereqs, we can actually find tax on a purchase. So the first thing you need to do is know how much your purchase is. And to do that, you could add up all your different items and basically get a subtotal of your purchase. Then we need to know our sales tax as a decimal, which I already said is going to always be 0.0825 sales tax for our area. Next, you multiply the purchase price, $60.58, by the decimal tax rate. So that's an example very similar to the one we did earlier. So you just do your multiplication and then decide where the decimal goes. So we have 2 spaces to the right here, 4 spaces here. 2 plus 4 is 6, so we move this decimal 6 over. But our situation here that causes a problem is that 4.997850 does not look like money to me. We want that to look like money, so it's going to have to be rounded to the hundredths place or rounded to the nearest cent. And when we round, that's going to be $5 because the 7 rounds the hundredths place up and so on to the left. So now we actually have $5 as our tax cost. That's not our tax rate. Remember, our rate was a percentage or a decimal. The cost of our tax is $5. What I need to do last to find out the total price that I'm going to have to pay at this register is I take the original price off the receipt, my subtotal, and I add that to the tax we just found. So there you go. You add your tax, you add your purchase price, and that is your total that you're going to have to be paying out of your pocket. Now, a situation is sometimes we don't have enough time for all of that. If we're waiting in line at the register, it's almost our turn, it might serve us better to actually estimate. So using the same information, we're going to round these values before we find our tax. So our subtotal is pretty close to $60. It's good to get a factor of 10 because those are real easy to do math with. Then our tax rate, 8.25%, pretty close to 10%. So we're also going to round that. So when I find my 10% of $60, that's going to be a pretty easy one we should be able to do, and that's $6. So this $6 is actually an estimated tax amount. If we look back to earlier, our actual tax amount would be about $5. So what I want you to do is notice the difference there. It was about $1 difference because we did round, we actually rounded this down, but we rounded our tax up to 10%. So you know it has to be a little bit less than $6. So in this situation, we take our subtotal, add it to our sales tax, and get a total of $65.58. So last, I'm pretty much done. I just wanted to remind you that you're going to have to stay up to date on all your operation rules so that you can take care of all this money business. You're going to have to be able to convert percent to a decimal before you multiply the price by the tax rate. And last, you're going to go ahead and add your tax amount to the purchase amount to get the total so you know exactly what you owe. And if you're in a hurry and you need to take care of business quick, go ahead and estimate and use 10% as your tax rate so that you can get a real quick estimation of how much you're going to have to pay out of pocket extra. Alright, thank you. That is all I have. There's my references where I got my information. Thank you.